Welcome back to the Pauper Metagame. I'm your host, MSP, and today we're going to break down Tortured Existence. Are you ready for the hype? I know, that was pretty incredible special effects, right? Anyway, here we go. We're going to break it down. Here's the default list you're going to find on MTG Goldfish, and that's what we're going to go into today. We're going to break this down in three parts. Part one, we're just going to generally talk about the generic power rating, and then sorry about that when sound effects go awry. We're going to talk about the general power level of this deck first, kind of where I think it is right now. Number two, we're going to break down the deck, go through some of the specifics and break down some of the cards. And then lastly, maybe we'll talk about some of the matchups and whatnot. So overall, where do I think this deck stacks up? Well, right now, MTG Goldfish has it rated, I think, around 2% of the metagame. This feels about right. This places it firmly around tier 3 status-ish, I would say. It's not a net negative deck. I'm guessing you can probably grind this in leagues and go positive. And if you know how to run this deck, you might even do kind of, even better than that. I'm probably talking it down a little bit. It's a little bit dirtily, and there's a lot of really, really fast stuff out there that requires you to either be able to put up fast proactive pressure, or alternatively, you need to be able to have very specific answers very consistently. This deck is not going to do either of those things. What this deck does is it has a very nice value engine. It can actually even compete with some decks that are using blue to draw cards and whatnot. But it's got to be able to basically dirtle along a little while. But the deck can basically do anything. So if you're looking for a deck that can theoretically have game against any other deck, because the deck has some creature removal, it's got some artifact kill, some enchantment kill, it's got graveyard hate, it's got some card advantage engines, it's got access to board sweepers. I mean, you name it, the deck can do it. It's got a lot of versatile options. And depending on the build you play, it can even have some explosive win from nowhere kind of situations around the kind of slightly early but not really early, kind of mid-game, early mid-game. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the cards. So this default list you're going to find is sporting a couple of carrion feeders, a few fume spitters, 3 spore frogs. What can we say about the fog frog that has not already been said? It is a fog on a stick, well, on a body, well, on a frog to be more specific. You can attack with it, you can fog with it, and of course, most importantly, you can actually use your Tortured Existence to recur it. So for those of you out there who have never heard of Tortured Existence, which, I mean, that's got to be pretty few of you to have found this obscure channel and this obscure video, but hey, you never know. So, Tortured Existence, it's a 1 black mana enchantment that says pay 1 black mana, discard a creature from your hand, and return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. So basically, once you have Tortured Existence in play, which you can drop on turn 1, you can just exchange your worst creature in your hand for your best creature in your graveyard. And sometimes it's not so simple as just best worst. Sometimes you just need a situational answer. Anyway, what this basically means is infinite fogs with the fog frog, basically. Anyway, so we've also got this deck has Perilous Mirror, which is it's kind of extra medium. It's a way to randomly kill stuff over and over. I guess that's cool, but it's also like most other things in the deck. It's pretty dirtily. We've got a Wayfinder here to let you get some land. I think having a copy of this is nice, or something to let you get some land. Crypt Rats. Oh yeah, I like this a lot. You can blow everything up on the board, get Crypt Rats back, and blow everything up on the board again. Pretty nice. Also, if you manage to just keep dirtling along and making your land drops, you can just kill your opponent with Crypt Rats, because you can use Golgari Brownscale to gain life. So basically, Golgari Brownscale is a 3 mana 2/3. You can dredge it for 2. Whenever the Brownscale is put into your hand from your graveyard, you gain 2 life. So what this means is you can utilize the Tortured Existence to gain life. You don't just have to wait to dredge this to gain the life, because the specific templating on this card is that whenever Golgari Brownscale is put into your hand from the graveyard, it doesn't specifically require the dredge. You gain 2 life. So what this means is if you have a Golgari Brownscale in your hand and you have one in your graveyard, you can basically gain 2 life for every 1 black mana you want to spend, because you just activate your Tortured Existence, again, pay 1 black mana, discard a Golgari Brownscale, pick up a Golgari Brownscale, and because Golgari Brownscale just went to your hand from your graveyard, you gain 2 life, and you can just repeat this over and over and over. If you only have access to a Golgari Brownscale in your hand and not one in your graveyard, then you can chunk the Golgari Brownscale to, say, get a Wayfinder, play the Wayfinder, and then next up keep dredge the Golgari Brownscale to gain 2 life again. So if you only have one Golgari Brownscale, it's pretty common for these decks to basically just always chunk the Golgari Brownscale to get whatever they want to get, and then dredge the Golgari Brownscale the next turn. So you're basically gaining 2 life every turn. It's just a little bit, but hey, it adds up. Also, I should go back and mention a little thing about Crypt Rats. Most of you out there probably already know this. There's not much to say here. Crypt Rats is just great. It nukes fairies, it nukes elves, it wipes out, decks that are based on a lot of swarmy 2/2 creatures. It does a lot of work. The one thing I wanted to say is there are some situations with Crypt Rats where crypting for 1 with a lot of 1 damage crypt activations on the stack works out better than crypting for a whole lot all at once. So most of you again probably already know this, but if you hold the control key, activate the Crypt Rats for 1 black mana, so you put 1 damage on the stack. By holding down the control key, you'll maintain priority, and then you can activate the Crypt Rat again for 1, and then just keep doing this over and over and over. So situations where this can matter is if your opponent has a creature that has Undying. This allows you to actually kill the original form of that creature and then also kill the Undying version of that creature as well, if you have enough mana to put enough 1 damage ticks on the stack. So I don't know, that's just a little random bit about Crypt Rats. I figured it might be worth mentioning. Also, Fume Spitter's cool because it allows you to get something proactive on the board for things like Tireless Tribe and Delver decks. So when you go up against Tireless Tribe, they have to kill the Fume Spitter before they go off, because it's just sitting there waiting, threatening to kill their Tireless Tribe when they combo. So they have to deal with the Fume Spitter, which is pretty cool because yeah, that just stymies their whole plan. Also, you can take out elves, you can drop it proactively, and then if they drop a Delver, kill it before it has a chance to transform. Fume Spitter is a very nice, I think somewhat, it's not like an all-star 5-star card or anything, but I think it's a somewhat underrated card. So I wanted to give a little shout out there as well. Anyway, breaking it down, Stinkweed Imp is pretty good. Dredge is 5, and it also basically has Death Touch. It's got more wordy templating than that, but we're just going to say basically Death Touch, 3 mana, 1/2 flyer that dredges for 5. This guy does a lot of work with the dredging. Dredging for 5 is a big dredge. Also, this allows you to repeatedly throw a defensive critter in the air to deal with all these blue decks, all these Delver Fairy decks that are floating around. You can just keep jamming Stinkweed Imp, and that's going to give you some nice defense. Also, you can use Stinkweed Imp to just repeatedly block 4/4 fatties from Affinity, because it's going to keep killing them, and then the Stinkweed Imp keeps coming back. Just a sweet card overall. Tilling Treefolk is kind of cool. It's a 3 mana 1/3. When it comes into play, you can return 2 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. Because these decks typically have cycling lands, this means that basically Tilling Treefolk is a very wonky Muldrifter. So what happens is you pay your 3, you get back 2 cycling lands, you pay a couple more mana to cycle your lands, and boom, you basically just drew 2 cards and got a 1/3 creature in play. And then apparently this deck list sacrifices the Tilling Treefolk to the Carrion Feeder and does it all over again next turn, because that's how they do shenanigans. And of course, don't forget, instead of actually drawing the cards with the Tranquil Thicket, we're probably just going to dredge a Stinkweed Imp or something ridiculous. Anyway, I digress. Grave Scrabbler's real good. I think you got to run this as more than just the 2 of in this deck. This is kind of the card, the glue that holds this deck together with the Tortured Existence. So it's Madness 2. When Grave Scrabbler comes into play, if its Madness cost was paid, you may return target creature card in a graveyard to its owner's hand. So basically the way this works is you Madness this creature into play with Tortured Existence, and so basically you're paying 3 mana, you're getting a 2/2, and then you get to pull a creature back to your hand as well. And then if they ever kill the Grave Scrabbler, then you just get it back and get value all over again. So that means for your opponent to keep you from getting value, they just have to let your Grave Scrabbler sit on the board. So the best answers are things that exile Grave Scrabbler, like Journey to Nowhere and stuff like that. If they don't have access to something like that, then they're probably going to try to maybe race you in the air or something, because killing Grave Scrabbler is just a value negative proposition, because it just keeps giving access to the Tortured Existence player. The Battle Scrounger is interesting. I don't think this is really necessary, but because we're talking about dredge, some people worry about accidentally decking themselves. This has threshold. Put 3 cards from your graveyard on the bottom of your library, and this guy gets +3/+3 until end of turn. You can only activate this once each turn. So basically lets you throw 3 cards from your graveyard back into your library, try to keep you from decking yourself. Horror of the Broken Land just works out nice because it says whenever you cycle or discard, it gets +2/+1, so every time you activate your Tortured Existence, it's going to get pumped. Basically, Horror of the Broken Lands makes for a pretty good finisher. So then we have the Krosan Tusker. This is okay. I kind of like it as a one-of. It allows you to get some value. You can cycle this for 3 mana, which is kind of a lot, but when you cycle it, not only do you get to draw a card, you get to search the library for a basic land, and then of course later on you could even just jam it as a fatty. This is 7 mana 6/5, nothing to sneeze at. Next up we've got Commune with the Gods. This is a fairly standard inclusion here. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature or enchantment card from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. And then a singular Gnaw to the Bone. I have mixed feelings about this. I feel like it's not terrible, because most of the time you'll just dredge it off the top. It'll be sitting in your graveyard and you can have it as free value. Although really maybe this should be a sideboard card, but I don't know. It's not bad. It's not like horrible. It might even be a nice little piece of tech. I don't know, but I think having a copy of this in your main or your sideboard is not a bad idea at all. Deadweight. So it's not unusual to see a few of these floating around. There's a few little synergies with the enchantments that are going on here. For example, we've got the Commune with the Gods, which lets you grab an enchantment or creature. So if you really need to find an answer, there's a chance you might be able to do that. And then Vessel of Nascency is a 1 mana enchantment. You can pay 2 to sacrifice it. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, grab an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker, and put it into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. So these decks, because they're mid-rangey, tend to run 23 to 24 land. Plus, typically these deck lists don't have to worry about getting flooded, because once they get the Tortured Existence and a Dredger online, they're not really going to be doing anything but dredging anyway. Barrenmoor is good because you got to have a little cycling action. Bojuka Bog is also good because of the fact that you're going to be able to snag it out of your graveyard if and when you need to with something like a Tilling Tree Folk, and then eat your opponent's graveyard. Forest, yay. Golgari Rot Farm, you can bounce your Bojuka Bog, do more shenanigans, or drop these bounce lands to pick up your cycle lands and cycle them out. Some Jungle Hollows for some mana fixing, some more swamps, and a couple of Tranquil Thickets. So nothing too fancy there. In the sideboard, we got a lot of rando Silver Bullets. Caustic Caterpillar is good. This is equally nice against both Affinity and Boggles, and even Heroic, because they tend to run some enchantments as well. Deadweight in case you need more removal. Another Spore Frog, because sometimes you just can't have too many Spore Frogs. Chainer's Edict, because you might need some removal. Mesmeric Fiend, eat your opponent's hand, 2 mana 1/1. When it comes into play, your opponent reveals their hand. You can grab a card from it. When it leaves play, you return the exiled card to the owner's battlefield. You can play the Mesmeric Fiend, and basically as soon as the trigger goes on the stack to eat an opponent's card, you automatically sack the Mesmeric Fiend, which puts the second trigger on the stack, which is when Mesmeric Fiend leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to its owner's hand. And of course you would sack the Mesmeric Fiend to the Carrion Feeder if you have one in play. So basically what ends up happening is, because you put the return a card trigger onto the hand first before the take a card trigger resolves, the short version of this is the card just ends up getting exiled and never comes back. So that's a kind of a trick to make that a permanent solution if you're worried about your opponent actually having some kind of removal to hit the Mesmeric Fiend later. More Crypt Rats to deal with a swarm of threats. The Fairy Macabre. This is really nice. It allows you to deal with oh these decks that are these blue decks that go deep on abusing their graveyard, mostly blue-based decks. You can actually exile stuff and do it in response to them targeting something in their graveyard. Maybe they're trying to use a mnemonic wall to get something back. In response, you can chunk the Fairy Macabre and eat and exile the cards. Also, you can loop the Fairy Macabre to the Tortured Existence, get your Fairy Macabre back, and then just keep exiling stuff if you want to. We've got another Knot of the Bone. This is also nice against burn. Faceless Butcher is just a bigger version of Mesmeric Fiend. Not sure I'm really digging that. Penumbra Spider is probably there to provide a little bit of a value engine against all the fairies out there. I'm sure part of the shenanigans with the Penumbra Spider here is that you play Penumbra Spider, sacrifice it to the Carrion Feeder. Now you have a 2/4 spider creature token with reach. Then you use Tortured Existence to get the spider back, recast it, and basically you can just build yourself an army of 2/4 spiders with reach. Thorn of the Black Rose, because if you're up against a really dirtily deck that's not going to attack you, why not draw an extra card every turn? Makes sense to me. Wickerburrow Elder, there's some choices here I don't really get. I feel like the Caustic Caterpillar is just better, but basically this is a 4-mana 4/4 that you can use to destroy some artifacts or enchantments. So overall, this particular deck list has some interesting things that I kind of like about it. I definitely like the Knot of the Bone. I think that's some pretty good stuff. I like the Bojuka Bog, and I like the Fume Spitters, and of course Spore Frog. I also like having the Crypt Rats in the main deck. I like Tilling Tree Folk, but it's really hard to make everything fit exactly right, so this might be a little greedy, but I like it. Next, we're going to look at a list by E. Hustle. E. Hustle is a guy who's been playing the Tortured Existence style decks for, I don't know, the last decade? Seriously, I remember running into this guy playing competitive Pauper matches and weekend challenges and stuff like that against E. Hustle since like a decade ago, and he's been playing Tortured Existence pretty much the whole time, off and on, whenever I've seen him. This particular list comes from April 11th, so apparently he's still at it. He 5-0'd with this list. I should also mention that E. Hustle has run Black-Green Tortured Existence. He's run Black-Green-White. He's even run White-Black. So this is a guy who's tried all kinds of variants. I'm sure he's tested most everything. I would actually consider Mr. E. Hustle to be one of the foremost experts on Tortured Existence. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to look at his particular list. I will say there's some things about this that I feel like could probably be improved, although in fairness to Mr. E. Hustle, he certainly knows a lot more about this archetype than I do, again. But for starters, let's just cover some of these cards first. Basking Root Wall, it's cute. I don't know how necessary this really is. He does have the 4 Fume Spitters. I like that. Olivia's Dragoon is kind of cool, just to have an extra flyer in there. I don't know how necessary this really is, but again, there's a lot of fairies and stuff out there. We've got 4 Wild Mongrels. I like it. The main deck Fairy Macabre feels a little cutesy, but it's actually okay because its backup plan is it's just a 3-mana 2/2 flyer. So you can start to get a sense that this deck really is doing a lot to interact with decks that have a lot of 1/1 flyers in the air to shut them down. We've got Golgari Brownscale, Stinkweed Imp, again another flyer. Now here's the E. Hustle tech. He's running Vampire Hounds. If he ends up getting a lot of creatures stacked up in his hand, he can just Alpha Strike you from nowhere. It's a 3-mana 2/2, discard a creature card. Vampire Hounds gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So say your opponent's sitting at maybe 12 life, and he's got a stack of creatures in hand, and boom, the Vampire Hounds just ends the game. Grave Scrabbler at 3. Seems like, that's probably right. It's probably better than 2. I feel like you might even want 4 of these, but we'll just trust E. Hustle at 3 is where you want to be. 2 Horror of the Broken Lands. I know it's a good finisher and all, but I feel like 1 copy would be okay. But I think the key here is because it cycles, you can afford to run 2 copies because it's not just like a dead card sitting in your hand when you don't need it. So this is probably why this is a 2 of them in some of these lists. The Sultai Scavenger is another delving flyer, so again you can see E. Hustle puts a lot of value on having flyers, which makes a lot of sense in the current meta. He's also got a Gurmag Angler. I really like this because Gurmag Angler is a boss, and I don't know how you can run a deck that's going to have fistfuls of cards in the graveyard without running at least one Gurmag Angler. I mean, come on, let's jam a copy in there. We've got a Krosan Tusker, which seems fine. And then this is a little weird to me, only having 3 copies of Commune with the Gods, but again, eHustle knows what he's doing, so I'll just trust him on this. 2 copies of Deadweight, 4 copies of Tortured Existence. We've got 4 Forest, 4 Golgari Rot Farm, 4 Jungle Hollow, 8 Swamp, 4 Terramorphic Expanse. So one thing you might notice here is we don't have any of the Cycle Land package. We also don't have the Bojuka Bog. Now, personally, I would like to have, I mean, you don't have to go all in and necessarily do all this tilling tree folk shenanigans and whatnot, but I think having a Wayfinder somewhere is kind of okay. Or maybe you drop the Wayfinder and just have tilling tree folk. I think that might be the way to go, because I really like having access to a copy of Bojuka Bog. I feel like you can do a lot of work with that one copy, and yeah, I feel like having the biggest things that I miss in eHustle's list from our original list we looked at is the Bojuka Bog, maybe a tilling tree folk, and then the Crypt Rats in the main I feel like is really nice. And then probably maybe the most important thing to note is the Spore Frog. I mean, come on, you gotta have Fog Frog, baby. Infinite fogs incoming. And what's sad is we don't even get the Fog Frog in the sideboard. I mean, come on. Now, maybe he just feels so confident that he's not gonna need it, but I just feel like it's too good. Like, basically the Fog Frog lock with Tortured Existence can just straight up win some matchups. Like if you're going up against Stompy, once you get that going, they can't do anything. They're done. A lot of Elves decks basically are completely shut down by that as well. Any deck that's going to rely on attacking on the ground or in the air. I mean, if you're up against a deck that's going to rely on attacking you to defeat you, they can't exile your graveyard, or they have no direct damage or any way to play Flaring Pain. I mean, they're done. Anyway, one of the other things is I liked this little tech of this singular copy of Thorn of the Black Rose. Again, maybe eHustle feels like he doesn't really need it, but I feel like this is a nice option to go up against. Like if you end up going up against something like Black Red Monarch, for example, it's nice to be able to do that. And then I really like the Gnaw to the Bone as a very sweet piece of tech against burn and whatnot. eHustle has the Brindle Boar, and I feel like Gnaw to the Bone just does this better. But again, you know, eHustle's been doing this a long time, so there's that. The 4 copies of Chainer's Edict, I don't necessarily have a problem with this, but that is a lot. Like maybe 3 would be okay. And I don't get why we have the Caustic Caterpillars and the Wickerbro Elders. I get that this basically becomes a 5/5, but I feel like if you are really concerned with killing artifacts and enchantments, you're probably concerned with doing it quickly, because things like Boggles and Affinity can blow you out real fast if you're not reacting quickly. So I feel like the Caustic Caterpillar is just where you want to be. I don't know. I'm not an expert on the list. Having a singular Doomblade also seems fine. This Una's Gate Warden is interesting. I think again this is basically just another nod to all of the fairies that are flying around out there. So this is a 1-mana 2/1 flying defender with Wither. So yeah, that's basically it. That's the Tortured Existence. I'm not super high on this deck right now, but you know, it's a thing. So let's talk a little bit about this. You can beat Izzet Delver, but a lot of it comes down to, like every other deck that's matching up against Izzet Delver, can you keep them from getting an early ninja on the board and then getting a few attacks in there, and are you going to be able to answer their flying package to tempo you out? So if they're able to, say, you know, stick a ninja on turn 2 and you can't answer it, and they start killing your creatures, and then they're able to keep jamming with the ninja and counterspelling your stuff, it's going to be a problem. Because the Dredge deck is so dirtily, a lot of it, like again most interactions when you're going up against a tempo deck, really does turn on how well you can react within the first 3 turns. If you can stabilize, you've actually got a decent longer game, especially if you're running like the eHustle version that has a lot of answers to flyers and can deal with 1/1s pretty well. So it's not like the worst matchup ever, but it doesn't seem great. Same thing for Mono Blue Delver. For Kuldotha Boros, You know, honestly, I've never seen this particular matchup played out, so I'm only speculating here. But these are both decks that can do a lot of grindy stuff. I feel like it could probably go either way, just kind of depending on how the cards fall. Stompy could probably blow out the Dredge deck in a lot of situations by coming out faster than they can answer. But if you have the Fog Frog, you got a pretty good chance, especially post sideboard. Against something like Tron, I don't really love playing the Dredge against Tron, but you know, and I don't think any of these lists had any land destruction coming out of the sideboard, but they do have some artifact hate, which is not totally irrelevant because if you're able to blow up the prophetic prisms, you really can cause them some problems in terms of jamming them up on colored mana. So that's kind of an interesting thing, but yeah, I don't love it because when you're dirtling against the Tron deck, Tron's long run game is pretty good. So not thrilled. You know, one thing I will say about the uh, the Tortured Existence deck is that basically it's kind of a 50-50 deck. Some of its matchups are going to be worse than 50-50. There's a fair amount of 50-50 matchups out there though. So you know, a lot of it just kind of depends on how well you play it and how the cards fall. A lot of the problems the deck has are because of the fact that it can get to these dirtily starts where really fast decks can blow it out, like Affinity, like Elves. But if you can stabilize, you're going to be able to basically beat those decks that are really fast with the value engine. And because you do have a lot of creatures you can proactively utilize and deploy for your defense, you're going to have some chance there. But the problem I see with this deck is where it has its strongest game is basically out grinding other mid-range decks. But there's not a whole ton of really grindy mid-range stuff out there, and the kind of stuff you're likely to see is stuff like Boros, Monarch, and Tron lists that also can potentially have some really nice grindy engines as well, and they may have Graveyard Hate in their sideboard. So it's just in that awkward place. There's a lot of Bojuka Bogs. There's a lot of Relic of Progenitus floating around out there. Basically, there's a lot of Graveyard Hate in sideboards out there. So this deck runs into the same problem that Affinity runs into, that Elves runs into, which is there's a lot of hate in sideboards and even some in main boards out there, and that can be a real problem. The deck can grind through a singular, you know, Bojuka Bog, but when you start talking about having bounce lands to go with that or multiple relics and things like that, it's just a beating. And the deck is not a deck that's so good that it's just always going to win game one to put you up for when you go into those sideboard games 2 and 3. A lot of the time I just feel like the deck is too much of a 50-50 matchup deck and then has a lot of considerable downside with a lot of the Graveyard Hate in the format. So for that reason, I think that generally sums up a lot of what you're going to run into out there. But anyway, if you really want to play this deck, it can be a lot of fun. It's a pretty fair deck, and if you want to build something in like a battle box in paper, this is a deck I would definitely recommend, because if you just want to introduce people to the format, these are the kind of decks you should build to show people the format, because they're a lot of fun, they're very interactive, there's a lot of thought and play to them, and that's a great way. You don't have to just build all the tier 1 decks. I actually think there's a lot of value in building, you know, a few tier 1 decks, a few tier 2 decks, and a few tier 3 decks, just to give people some sense of the variance. And as you can see, this list, even though I am kind of talking this down, this list did 5-0, you know, just a few days ago on May 2nd. So, you know, the deck definitely has some game to it. So yeah, that's Tortured Existence. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and have a great one. Peace.